Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this learning experience brought to you by DigiCert. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. Before we dive into our program today, I have just a couple of notes I'd like to review with everyone. First off, we are recording today's session. So if you miss any of our discussion, if you'd like to rewatch at a later time, or if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving an email after we conclude today, and that email will include the recording from today's session. So if you want to get involved, there are a couple of ways to do so. The first option is the chat tab on the right side of your screen. So when you find that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you're joining us from today. Now, if you have any questions, we would like to direct you to the Q&A tab on the right side of that chat section. Sending in your questions to that Q&A will just help us keep track, and as we are holding most of the questions until the end, that's just the most effective way to make sure your question gets answered. So be sure to send it over to that Q&A section. Additionally, we have a couple of polls that will be popping up at the front end of our program and one final poll that will launch toward the end of our program, so keep an eye out for those as they come up. And if you jump over to that handout section, you'll see there are some resources there for you, so feel free to grab those before you leave today. And of course, finally, we will be selecting 2 of our most engaged participants today to receive a $50 Amazon gift card. So be sure to send in your chats, your questions, and fill out our survey. All of those qualify you for this giveaway. So our topic is SBOMs are da bomb for identifying threats in your software. I'm joined today by Eddie Glenn, Senior Manager of Software Trust at DigiCert. So Eddie, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to pass it on over to you.
Thanks a lot, Cody, and I'm really excited to be here. And this is a topic I love talking about, so I hope that I'm able to provide you some information about SBOMs. Before I get started, I know that in this group, there's lots of different kinds of roles of people that are participating. So I'd like to start off with a poll question. What is your role within your organization? So when that poll comes up, just select what your role is within the organization, and that'll give me an idea of if you all are primarily developers or security people or a mix of both. And Cody, I'm not able to see the results, so maybe if you could read those off, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Sure. So right now I'm seeing in first place, we have a tie between DevOps engineer and other, each with 32%. So that's 64% of our results. 19% are product and software management. And then we've got a couple of votes in enterprise security management, enterprise security engineer, and product software developer.
Awesome. That's a great mix of people. So this should be a great webinar. Okay, I want to ask the second poll question, and that is, I'm curious about if you all are generating SBOMs for the software that you build currently.
So just waiting for a few more of the results to come in, but the early statistics are showing overwhelmingly no. 73% of our attendees are voting no.
Interesting. Okay, and then let's go to the third poll question. And this is probably because of those no's. I think I probably know the answer to this one, but it's how is your organization planning to meet regulatory SBOM requirements?
Waiting for a few more responses to come in. There we are. So I'm seeing 50% are currently looking at SBOM tools, 35% do not know, 10%, a little bit less than 10%. We've just had a little bit of change in the numbers, but about 6% we have no plans or need for generating SBOMs, and about 10% say we already have an SBOM solution in place. So majority are currently looking.
Okay, great. And I appreciate everyone taking the time for these survey questions. It helps me gauge on what I talk about for the rest of our time here together. So this is kind of what I'm planning to cover today. For some of you, you may not even know what an SBOM is, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about SBOMs. I'm going to talk about why we generate SBOMs and why we want to generate SBOMs, how your organization can effectively use SBOMs. And SBOMs are part of software supply chain strategy. So I'm going to talk about other measures that help protect your software supply chain, and then we'll wrap things up. And it's only at that last section that I'll even mention a product that DigiCert sells. So really, this is really meant to be informational for all of you today. So why are we even here? Why are we talking about this? I'm an old software developer. I mean, I'm old and I used to be a software developer, so I guess that's true in a couple of different ways. But when I was developing software 30 years ago, we didn't really have to worry about software supply chain attacks. And that's because we wrote all of our own software. All of our own software stayed on premise. We didn't use open source. We didn't do updates over the air or through the internet. So it was really secure. That's all changed. And when we look at how attackers are hitting the software supply chain, those have changed. Those methods have changed as well. One of the most notorious ones happened back in the mid 2010s, and it involved a company called Asus Computers, and that was an attack on code signing keys. And they were able to add malware to some Asus driver updates, and that was then installed on their customers' computers and then infected their customers' computers. We've changed, we've adapted to those kind of attacks, and now we're seeing that attackers are looking at different ways and more novel ways. And just going back just 2 years to SolarWinds, I'm sure everyone on this call has heard about SolarWinds, but we're starting to see very novel, very hard to detect, very hard to prevent kinds of software supply chain attacks. So attackers are looking at build platforms that aren't secure. They're looking at exploiting poor code signing hygiene. So, that's what happened with Asus Computers and several others. Hackers are putting malware into open source software, and that's being downloaded and incorporated into commercial products without the developers knowing that. And they're looking at exploiting insecure software engineering practices. So really, the types of attacks have grown. They've grown in complexity. They're much harder to stop these days. And SBOMs are one way, not the only way, but one way for us to start to battle what those attacks are. And then we just have to go back and look at today's modern software. It's extremely complex. When I was writing software 30 years ago, a 100,000 line program was considered really, really large, written by maybe a team of 30 people. But this is a graph of the Apache HTTP server. It has over 2 million lines of code. And this code has been written by probably hundreds of different people around the world. It has lots of dependencies between different components. And just because of that, it makes that software very hard to protect. And then when we look at other aspects of modern software development, we've got geographically distributed teams. So hundreds or thousands of global developers, extremely large code bases. 2 million is probably not even on the large size anymore for typical modern application. Multi-platform development. So how many applications today have a component that resides on a mobile device, has a component that resides in the cloud, has a component that resides on-prem in a data center? So it's a multi-platform deployment type of situation that makes modern software applications extremely complex. And then we've got a very large supply chain. So, when I was writing software, nothing came from a third party. Today, I'd say majority of it comes from a third party, including open source software, third party commercial software, like in the form of libraries that get linked in. You have the software that you develop in-house, and then you have old and legacy software. And that's probably the most scary aspect, because there's likely no one around who even understands that software anymore. So when you go to release an application and someone asks you what's in this application, it's a really, really difficult question to answer. And then because there are lots of dependencies. They're both, some of the dependencies are known, but more frequently than not, they're unknown. And then the other aspect is that when I was starting out my career writing software, we were lucky to do one release a year. And today with DevOps and CI/CD, we're talking about a release every day. Some of our customers are releasing multiple times a day. So it's extremely frequent releases, and that adds also to the complexity factor. And then there's this new thing with global regulatory issues. And some of the regulations differ from region to region, and that adds complexity to what you all have to manage as well. And then when we look at the numbers, and these numbers come from analyst firms like Gartner and Forrester, but 45% of the organizations will experience software supply chain attacks by 2025. 45%, almost half. So almost half of you on the call today, your organization will be hit by a software supply chain attack by 2025, according to this stat. 99% of code bases contain third-party software and open source software. Huge. And then just the growth in number of supply chain attacks just in 1 year, and this is now a year and a half old, 633%. So being on the security side of the house now, I'm really concerned by these numbers, and it really indicates that we have to do a better job of protecting our software supply chains and software development life cycles. Okay, so that's the background. That's why I'm passionate about this topic. So let's move into what are SBOMs. And this is the fun part of the conversation for me because I get to bring in some of my real life. So I have 2 kids, and they happen to like this product for breakfast. And it seems like it's healthy. In fact, if you see on the label here, right on the front of the box, it says it's made with real fruit and whole grains. And so I know when I was in the store buying it for them, I took a quick glance at the nutrition facts, and it doesn't seem terrible. 120 calories. It has some fiber. It might be a little high in sugar. So on the surface, it seems like it's pretty safe and healthy for them to consume. But when I got home and I took a look at the back of the box and looked at the ingredients, I mean, first off, there are lots of ingredients here, right? That in itself is kind of indicative of maybe there might be a problem lurking. But I start looking at, okay, the amount of oil, the amount of sugar and different kinds of sugars, it's pretty high in this particular product. Then there's this ingredient called carrageenan, I think is how it's pronounced, but it's an emulsifier that's linked to colon cancer, but yet it's in this product. Then there is guar gum, and this one really is perplexing because apparently it's a substance that helps address both diarrhea and constipation. They seem like they're opposite problems, so I don't know how one substance can help with both. So I found that a little comical. There's chalk in it. And then, of course, they use Red 40, which is banned in the EU, and I believe it's now banned in California, I think is the last that I heard. So, this is a pretty startling revelation as to, something that my kids love to eat. And by looking at not only the nutrition facts of the food, but the ingredients within it, and then making some doing some research to find out, are these ingredients good ingredients or bad ingredients? We can kind of judge that is this particular packaged food, healthy or not? And so that's really the tie into the software bill of materials. It's an ingredient list for the software, but it becomes much more than that. So just like, the ingredient list on the food package, I had to look up, these various chemicals, what are they? What do they mean? Well, with software components, you need to know more than just a list of the components. You need to know the relationships and the dependencies between those components. You need to have file information, to be able to identify the component. What version of the package of that component was being used? Where did the component come from? Was this downloaded from this particular open source repository or that open source repository? And then is there some knowledge about the quality of the component? So software bill of materials tells us all of this, not just the list. And then this is basically useful for us to understand if there are safe or unsafe ingredients in the software that we're producing. And then most software bill of materials are produced in a couple of standard industry formats. This is one particular format, SPDX, and basically it specifies that SBOM has this kinds of information in it. And the reason that we have standards is so that different tools that are able to parse SBOMs can read SBOMs no matter who produces them. So we've talked about the ingredient list, but there's another aspect of a software supply chain, and that is how it starts from the raw materials and ends up with a consumer. And I love using another food analogy here, and that's the production of milk. That we've got cow on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side producing the milk. We've got the person on the right-hand side that's going to consume the milk. And as we all know, additives get added to most of our food supply, and one of those additives is bovine growth hormone in cows, so BST. This is something, as I was doing research for this webinar, I didn't realize, but this is something called ammonium sulfate, and it's an inorganic salt that helps improve the consistency of milk, so that gets added as well. That's added somewhere after the milk is produced by the cow, and it's in a distribution facility. And then this, is added to the product that the consumer then consumes. So when we take this analogy and look at it from the software perspective, we got software teams. So, most of you're producing your software. You're, wanting to analyze your software to generate a list of its components, its dependencies of those components, the versions of those components. And then you have consumers of your software. So they could be consumers like customers, regulatory agencies, government agencies. There might be consumers that are internal as well. Like your security teams, your test teams, and maybe a legal compliance or risk team. And this is where these consumers of an SBOM would want to be able to analyze what's in your software, its ingredient list, to assess risk, vulnerabilities, and liabilities that might be present. So there are different ways for SBOMs to be generated. The first way is source code analysis or software decomposition, and that usually happens over here. It's, when we still have access to the source code, we have access, to whatever source code's available, but it does require the source code. And we know, from what I mentioned earlier, that when we produce software, we don't always have access to the source code because some of it might be legacy code that is still just a binary image, or might be a library that comes from a third party. So source code analysis only works if we have source code. It's also really useful for if you have a heavy reliance on open source software. And the pros of doing source code analysis for your SBOM generation is that it provides a very comprehensive report on the analyzed source code. It's able to report on licensing information, component versions, dependencies, things like that. So it's really useful for your legal and compliance departments to know, is everything that you're producing in your software and using within your software, is that in line with what they require from a license and compliance perspective? But there is a pretty major con, and that is this kind of analysis to generate an SBOM only works if you have access to the source code. And we know that's not always the case. The other thing that's a con is that it doesn't catch anything that happens over here. From the moment the source code's produced to when it's compiled, the images are built and then distributed. So, if we go back to the analogy, there's no way to know if there have been additives added. And this is where a lot of software supply chain attacks occur. It's in the build life cycle. So a source code analysis and an SBOM generated by that is not necessarily going to catch this kind of issue. A great example, and these is FOSSA. They have an awesome open source scanning tool. They're a partner of ours. We're integrated with their solution. And I'd say this is one of the best on the market for doing source code analysis. So that's this particular way of generating the SBOM is through source code analysis. But there's another way to generate SBOMs, and that's through binary software analysis. And binary software analysis basically takes, as its name implies, the final binary image, and it does a deep analysis on that binary. And it's able to do that on different kinds of binaries. So not just Windows executables, but DLLs. If it's an embedded product, then it's going to be the embedded binary, etc. And the pro for this kind of analysis is that it's going to catch potentially what was done over here, as well as anything that's happened during the process of producing that software. So during the software supply chain. So it's a much more broad analysis, and it catches vulnerabilities that occur throughout the CI/CD pipeline. But the con is that it will not have as much detail in that analysis as the source code analysis that happened over here. And a great example of a company that does incredible binary software analysis is Reversing Labs. And Reversing Labs' technology is a part of our solution. And we're very happy to include that in our security tool that does this kind of analysis. But at the end of the day, when someone says, well, which do you prefer, the source code analysis or the binary analysis? It's an easy answer. You've got to do both. Because as we've seen with those software supply chain attacks that I talked about at the top of the webinar, they're happening in many different ways. And in some cases, binary software analysis is going to catch those issues. In other cases, if a different kind of attack occurred, it's going to be source code analysis. So we really recommend that everyone do both kinds of analysis on the software that they're producing. Okay, I'm going to take a minute to wet my mouth, and then we'll move on to why are SBOMs important. It really comes down to software transparency. The people that are using your software need to know what's in your software. And there are actually some regulatory drivers that's driving this. And the reason that there are regulatory drivers is a result of all of the software supply chain attacks that have occurred over recent years. So this kind of started back with an executive order a few years ago that basically directed all federal agencies to require SBOMs for mission important software that they obtain from third parties. This similar thing was done in Europe. They have a Cyber Resilience Act. And then just recently, and this is the one that really impacted a lot of our customers, is the FDA required that all medical device manufacturers, as of October 1st, 2023, they have to produce an SBOM. Gartner is estimating that by 2026, so just a few years from now, at least 60% of organizations, so this isn't government, this is just companies in general, are going to require an SBOM to be provided with any kind of software that they use that's mission critical to their business. That's really important. If you're a software developer, you need to have a solution in place. So that's why I wanted to ask the question early on of how many of you are actively looking for an SBOM solution or have one in place today, because eventually you're going to need to find an SBOM solution. And then another quote that I really like from Gartner is that software bill of materials improve the visibility, transparency, security, and integrity of both open source and proprietary source code in software supply chains. So it's a proven technique to help battle some of these software supply chain attacks. So this is, I think, the final poll question we have. And this is going to lead us into the next section, is that if you are generating SBOMs today, how is your organization using those SBOMs?
So we're looking at some of the early results here. Currently, about 70% are responding we don't generate SBOMs. That's just dropped down to about 60%. The next highest with 26% is we use them to identify potential problems in our software. And then just about 15% we don't use them, but we do hand them off to our security compliance team. And in last place with about 3% right now, we generate them, but we don't use them.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm not surprised by that at all. One of the things that I frequently hear from development teams that I speak with at our customers is they kind of look at SBOMs as this is something that we have to do. We don't really want to do it, and we just hand it off to or security team, we don't know what they do with it. So in the next section, I want to give you some tips for how you can use an SBOM if you're a developer. So first thing is that you can look for vulnerable and targeted versions of libraries or components. I mean, we heard about Log4j a few months ago. I know that your organization could potentially use that, throughout in multiple development teams. Do you use it? Do you use the version that was impacted? If you generated an SBOM, it would be really easy for you to look that up. You can look at the dependencies of any open source software that you do use. Because that's one of the things that we discover is that people frequently will throw something into a build script that downloads an open source package, but they don't really pay attention to all the dependencies that it requires that get downloaded as well. And the other aspect is that over time, open source software usually comes out with security patches. It's the ability to, as a developer, to track do you have all of the required security patches for the software that you're using. So that's one aspect of how you can utilize an SBOM. Another aspect is to look for outdated components. Look for missing mitigations for past issues that have been found, past vulnerabilities that have been discovered. And then also it's a way to look for past insecure code signing practices. So let's say you're using a component from a company where it was announced that they had a breach of their code signing private keys. So you don't necessarily know if that component is actually safe for you to use anymore because it could be infected with malware that was re-signed with those private code signing keys. So by having an SBOM, you can leverage that information to help make your product more secure. And then this is more for your security teams, but it's basically to help them take more proactive defensive measures by utilizing the software structure of what's being analyzed. And we go back to the Apache dependency list. That's as an example of modern software. It's a very complex piece of code. And when a security team starts to have to work on responses and do threat modeling, it's really helpful to have that list of software components that's contained within that. So I'd like to move on to now, let's talk a little bit about protecting other measures that you should take to protect your software supply chain. And I'm going to start here at the last one. So, if I look at just the normal DevOps path, one of the things that comes from this is that nothing ever starts and ends. It's just a continuous process. And the same is true for SBOMs. And this is a point I wanted to make earlier, but I remembered that I had the slide, so I thought I would hold off and talk about this now. And that is, and I hear this a lot with some of our customers, that they see generating an SBOM as like a once and done type of situation, but really an SBOM should be generated every time you do a software release. Why is that necessary? Why is that important? It's so that you can start to compare versions of SBOMs. That you released version 8 of the software this week, you had version 7 last week. Now we can look at both SBOMs and see if there are differences. We would be able to detect if someone was able to infiltrate our build environment and insert some additional source code that may have malware embedded in it. So really important to have this part of just your regular build cycle. But when we take a step back and think about how do we protect that software development lifecycle and the software supply chain, it's really important to build this multifaceted and integrated next generation approach to where we combine multiple aspects of software security. So first thing is we want to take a step up or take a step back and look at the big picture. So frequently we're focused down in the weeds on this particular issue or that particular issue, but it's really important for us to at least have some visibility into the big picture of what's happening across the entire software lifecycle. So it's a policy-driven approach to security as well as enterprise-wide visibility. When I talk to security teams that are customers, one of the frequent complaints that I hear is that they don't necessarily, that there's, one group is supporting 15, 20 different software development teams. They're all doing things slightly different. So it's really hard for the security team to have a top level visibility. So, one of the things I encourage developers is to work with your security counterparts to make sure that you're helping them with that visibility, because they might be able to spot problems because they've taken a step back versus what you're able to spot because you are in the code every day. So that's the first thing, is shift up policy. Second thing that's extremely important is enterprise code signing. Everyone has to code sign these days. It's a requirement by most operating systems. But what's not necessarily required is that you do that in a secure way. And we've seen countless times how attackers leverage insecure code signing practices within an organization. Either the keys are not securely stored, or they're not controlled they're not accessed in a controlled way. They don't require approvers to use them. They don't have any other kind of limitations on their use. So these are all things that's really important to an enterprise, and we want to have this be consistently applied across all different kinds of software development teams. It doesn't matter if you're developing cloud native software, you're developing on-prem software, Java software, Microsoft, Linux, whatever. There should be a way for your organization at the enterprise level to enforce the same kind of code signing policies without impacting all of you doing development work, to have a secure enterprise-based code signing policy. Then finally, threat detection, threat and vulnerability detection. SBOMs help report on what's in the software, but by doing threat and vulnerability scanning, and this is something else that we are able to provide with our partnership with Reversing Labs, we're able to scan final binary images and look for all different types of threats, vulnerabilities, and malware within the product. So we really see this as an enterprise approach to securing software supply chain. And it's something that when we talk to our customers, we encourage them to adopt these 4 strategies. And then when we look at how does this play out over software build lifecycle, we go from your source code to build to packaging, and it's really, we're talking about the integrity of different components throughout the process. Code integrity, which requires things like scanning that source code, like I talked about with software composition analysis, signing that source code before you commit it to your repository, not using source code that hasn't been scanned and then signed by someone trustworthy within your organization. These are ways to help address some of those risks. Being able to have a reproducible build. And I'd go even further and say ethereal build environments are important as well, and then doing threat detection on those build environments. During the building of software, keeping any kind of secrets protected and secured, like private code signing keys, and then making sure that this is all automated. I've tell our security customers many times, that no matter what you put in place, you need to make it very easy for software developers to use. It has to be automated into the tools that they currently use, the environments that they use, the methodologies that they use. Automation is key. And then finally, when we get to software and packaged software, the integrity of it, again, it's threat detection. It's being able to log every event that happens during that build process, log the scans, keep track of the scan results, and keep track of those SBOMs. And then an obvious part of this is signing the SBOMs. Once you do a release, you want to sign that SBOM to show that it can't be tampered with in the future. And then this gets me to the last thing I wanted to talk about. And again, I really wanted to make this educational today and didn't want to make it very salesy at all, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention a solution that DigiCert provides called Software Trust Management. And it really does provide this integrated workflow environment that's designed for enterprises. So it's designed for teams that, software development teams of many different kinds, be it cloud native developers, Java developers, device developers, whatever kind of software development environment you have, this platform is compatible with, and it provides that top level visibility that your security teams need. It's automated and it's non-intrusive for developers, so it doesn't impact your builds, and it includes threat detection, secured code signing, as well as SBOM generation. So I wanted to say thank you for your time today. I'm happy to answer a few questions. And I'm going to switch over now to look at the panel to see what questions have come in.
Hey, Eddie, it looks like we've gotten a couple questions so far, but I'll remind our audience to send in your questions now if you have any. Our first one we have reads, explain again the difference between SBOMs generated from source code and those from binaries.
Okay, good question. So SBOMs generated from binaries will take into account everything that's happened to the software throughout your development process. So compilation, linking, building, packaging, etc. It's looking at the final binary. So it's very comprehensive across, and it doesn't matter how the source code, how the software originated. It could have originated the source code. It could have originated as third-party libraries that are linked in, or third-party binary components that are included. So it's able to look across all of those, but it may not provide as much detailed information as what you would find with source code analysis, where the source code analysis is able to look at much more of the details of the source code. And that's why, as I said earlier, it's really important to do both to catch various different kinds of threats and vulnerabilities.
Awesome. Thank you, Eddie. Our next question is, what DevOps tools can your solution be used with?
So most of the popular platforms are compatible. I know a lot of people use Jenkins. A lot of people use the tools that are provided with cloud environments like Azure. So really, at this point, we've not found any limitations of a development platform that our tools won't work with. We have an open API, and everything's very scriptable. And as I mentioned with the scanning, we're able to, I think it's scan over 3,000 different 4,000 different file types, binary file types. So it's very comprehensive.
Great. And Eddie, I think you might have just addressed part of what this next question was asking, but I'm going to go ahead and ask the whole thing anyway. Is there a way to take the SBOM and run the items against an API to see if any of the items have vulnerabilities or malware? Or is that what your product does?
So our product generates the SBOM, and then there are other products out there that will take that SBOM and do further analysis to it. And it's done through APIs, as well as analyzing the SBOM itself.
Perfect. And right now, it looks like it's going to be our last question, but what sets you apart from some of your competitors?
It's really our approach to thinking about software security as an integrated workflow across many different elements of the software lifecycle. So DigiCert started off doing just secure code signing, and then we've expanded that to include other aspects of techniques needed for protecting the software supply chain, like threat analysis, as well as SBOM generation.
Awesome. So I lied to you. We've continued receiving some questions. Eddie, how do you think SBOMs will evolve in about the next 5 years?
That's a great question. I think the most obvious thing is that if we were 2 years from now and we asked the same poll question, that we'd have much higher percentage of respondents saying that they already use SBOMs and they generate SBOMs. So I think that's the first trend. And I think as Gartner was predicting that the federal government has started off, the U.S. federal government has started off by requiring SBOMs for business critical software applications. It's going to happen with commercial as well. I know that at DigiCert, I wanted to install something on my computer, and one of the things that my security team asked me to ask for from the vendor was, do they have an SBOM? So I think that's the other trend that we're going to see, is that more commercial companies are going to require that.
Perfect. How does your product reduce alert noise?
So our product generates, so there are different ways to do that. With our threat detection, our customers are able to configure, what they're concerned with to reduce that noise. SBOM, we generate the SBOM, we don't analyze it. So there really is no alert noise from the SBOM. It would be whatever tool they're using to analyze that SBOM.
Perfect. And what kind of practices do you think should be used in order to maybe get ahead of an SBOM? Or I'm trying to concise this question a little bit, but say a developer picked a certain product, went through some development, and then all of a sudden the SBOM reports of malicious and improper resources. Is there just a way to get ahead of that?
Um, I think that the first thing is to generate the SBOM, and then have in place, if you're going to use those SBOMs internally, what tools are you going to use to analyze them? And FOSSA, I think, is one tool that helps with that analysis. Um, but I think for this webinar, that's a topic I'd rather not get too deep into.
Okay. Once I have an SBOM, what are people looking for to decide that the SW is okay? Is this process automated?
Again, that would come down to what tools you're using to analyze the SBOM. Those tools will, have the rules built into them as to what, components are known to have vulnerabilities in them, what components are known to be outdated that need to be patched, etc. So again, what we're doing at DigiCert is the generation of those, not necessarily the analysis of what's being generated.
Okay, awesome. Eddie, thank you for that clarification. So at this point, we're seeing no more questions. Was there anything that you wanted to leave our audience with before we start winding things down?
I just wanted to thank you for your attention today. We do have some handouts. Would really encourage for you to download those. And feel free to reach out to me either on LinkedIn or through email, and I'd be happy to answer any more questions that you have.
Awesome. Well, Eddie, thank you so much for your time. It was such a pleasure having you on Techstrong Learning with us today.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you, everyone.
Of course. So to our audience, just a couple more things. I've put in the bottom of the chat just a link to our post-webinar survey. So if you would like to fill that out for us, we'd really appreciate it. I'll also remind everyone that we have been recording our conversation today. So if you want to rewatch, then you will be receiving an email with a link to access this recording on demand, or you can find it on the DevOps website. That's devops.com/webinars. And again, it will be in the on-demand section. We'll be reaching out to 2 of our most engaged attendees today to distribute $50 gift card to each of you. So keep an eye out just in case you're selected to be one of our lucky winners. I'd like to thank DigiCert for sponsoring our program today. And thank you everyone for joining. We appreciate your comments, your questions, and your engagement today. So thank you so much for joining us on Techstrong Learning. Everyone, you may now disconnect. Have a great day. And Eddie, thanks again.
Bye.